Hey everybody, welcome. I can't believe it's finally here. Here we are on our third Western swing. We've been through West Virginia and Kentucky. We've been to Petersburg and North Carolina. You can decide whether or not Petersburg's in the West, but North Carolina definitely is. I'm still not entirely sure why. And here we are on our third one, and you, the members of this organization, have actually supported us in coming out to shoot as many videos as we can. And this is our first stop. We are at the site of, or right overlooking the site of Fort Henry. And we have a lot to do on this trip. We're going to be at Fort Henry. We're going to follow U.S. Grant down from Fort Henry to Fort Donelson, all the way down toward Shiloh and then Corinth. We're going to take a little interlude there, head on over to Murfreesboro and talk about Stones River. We're going to head on back over to Parker's Crossroads before we sort of go on down to Mississippi again, do Bryce's Crossroads, and then we're going to hit a little bit of 1864 stuff, Spring Hill, Franklin, and Nashville. And one thing about learning about Civil War is that everything associated with Fort Henry is gone. Well, Parker's Crossroads has highways through it. That's all gone. Stones River is basically gone. We're going to prove you wrong on all of that stuff. So we're starting out here in February of 1862, but we haven't introduced anything. We're going to talk about some people you know, some places you know, and to start that off, let's bring on Chris Mackowski, Emerging Civil War.
Thanks so much, Gary. One of the things that you're going to see a lot of over the course of the next few days, a lot of Ulysses S. Grant and a lot of Nathan Bedford Forrest. And what a great place to start those stories here at Fort Henry and Fort Donelson. Historian Jack Hurst calls these two men the men of fire. And we're going to see this interesting trajectory of these two men who have become legends in our own time and perhaps in their own minds. But at 1862, as their stories get started, they are both really untried, untested, unknown figures who are going to begin to build on their careers and on their eventual legends. This is going to be a trip that starts here in the waters off of Fort Henry. It's going to lead all the way to the White House, all the way around the world for Ulysses S. Grant. And so we're going to have some really interesting insights to watch as we start to build him over the next few days as we visit some fantastic battlefields. Before we get started with all of that, we're going to talk about what actually happened right here in this area right behind us. And to do that, I want to bring on historian Greg Biggs. Greg is a historian with the National Park Service at Fort Donelson, does a lot of staff ride stuff, and you might know him because he is the guru when it comes to Civil War flags. Greg, come on out and tell us, what are we looking at or not seeing that's here?
Well, we'd have to get a scuba mask and a tank and go down about 10 or 15 feet, but right behind me is about where Fort Henry was. Let me talk a little bit about what the Tennesseans are doing prior to their official secession on June 8th of 1861. They look at the Kentucky neutrality issue as securing their northern border, but then the Governor Isham Harris looks at the two rivers that bisect that defense line. We're on the Tennessee River behind me, and we'll be going to the Cumberland River later today. So he will send out an engineer named Adna Anderson to survey sites for forts, and then they will send other military engineers out here to certify those surveys. They like what they see at Fort Donelson, which we'll be getting to, and here at Fort Henry, there's a problem. Fort Henry was built at a place called Kirkman's Old Landing, which was a steamboat landing, and that means if you have a steamboat landing where a steamboat could just sail up and drop, bottom out, drop its ramp, and then tie onto a tree, and cargo and people get on and off, that means it can flood. And this is before the Tennessee Valley Authority builds their lock and dam system in the 1930s. So as what's going to happen during this campaign, it will rain incessantly. The rivers will rise 2 feet an hour. When Joseph Davis is here laying out the works for Fort Henry, he's informed by a local to look up the tree trunks and see how high the floodwater marks are, which will be well over the walls of Fort Henry once they get them completed. The original site of Fort Henry was a few miles south of here at Standing Rock Creek, but it was not a good site because the river made an S-curve like this there, and the Confederates wanted about 2 miles of straight line river so they could mount their batteries and secure the river that way. So they will start building Fort Henry, which eventually will have 17 pieces of heavy artillery in sight.
So this is great. Thanks, Greg. And by the way, Greg is still is president of the Clarksville Civil War Roundtable, and he's relentless. One day he'll get me to speak there. We keep talking about that, and one day I shall head up in that direction. So, in talking about Fort Henry, here we are. This is 1862, and we're talking big strategy here. And what is going to happen, during early 1862 is a massive Union conquering of Confederate territory. So you're talking about stuff going on in the Trans-Mississippi, opening up much of Arkansas, saving a lot of Missouri for the Union, and opening up vast stretches of territory here in Tennessee. So let's get into this a little bit, Greg. So, let's bring the troops here. Who's really trying to grab it? Who's behind it? And what's happening?
Okay. One thing the Confederates realized after the Kentucky neutrality issue falls in September of 1861 is that on the high ground across the river, on a ridge, they're going to build Fort Hyman. Fort Hyman will secure their left flank. The idea is to put troops over there. There were 1,100 troops over there when the campaign began, and some field pieces, but it wasn't totally completed. If the Union gets on Fort Hyman and puts a battery of artillery up there, Fort Henry becomes untenable. On February 2nd, 1862, Grant gets his transports loaded up at Paducah, Kentucky, starting out with John McClernand's division, and he will sail north on the Tennessee River, which is upstream, and about 8 miles or so north of here is at Itra's Landing. And McClernand will drop his division at Itra's Landing, and then Grant and Foote do a gunboat reconnaissance down to Panther Island. And they realize it's too far for the terrain for McClernand to march, especially in the rainy weather. So you're going to have hills that do like this and swales that will quickly fill with rainwater because the limestone underneath this soil kicks water back very rapidly. Again, rivers rising 2 feet an hour in the incessant rains. So they will reload McClernand's division on the boats and sail to Bailey's Landing, which is only 4 miles downstream, and McClernand will establish fortifications there and call them Camp Halleck. On the opposite bank behind me, Charles Ferguson Smith's division is going to be landed. After McClernand's been landed, the transports go back and pick him up, and his mission is to go after Fort Hyman because they want to be able to try to get that place, put artillery in there if they can, and then assault Fort Henry just by artillery fire. Again, when you go to Fort Hyman, which is part of the National Park Service property, you can look down at this area and see that battery field pieces alone would make Fort Henry completely untenable. So the campaign will kick off on the 6th of February when Flag Officer Andrew Hull Foote will show up with several of his ironclad gunboats, including the converted USS Essex, the USS Cincinnati among them, and then the 3 timber-clad gunboats, the Lexington, Tyler, and Conestoga. And they will come to the west side of Panther Island where they will see Confederate torpedoes, and they will scoop them out of the river as quickly as they can. Because the rivers are raising quite quickly, the ropes that secure them to the bottom are snapping, and a lot of the torpedoes are just going to float upstream and not hit anything, thankfully. Some are waterlogged, but that's where they're going to send their gunboats and ironclads on the west side of Panther Island. And that's not where the Confederate guns of Fort Henry are zeroed. They're zeroed on the east side of Panther Island. And then the battle will start. Lloyd Tillman, who's the on-site commander, Brigadier General from Paducah, Kentucky, former Kentucky State Guard, sees what's happening. His Confederate cavalry scouts come in on both sides of the river, and they see McClernand on the east bank, Smith's division on the west bank, and he realizes what the plan is. And what Grant wants to do is not just capture Fort Henry, but cut off the garrison of about 2,400 troops. Take them all prisoner. He's thinking ahead. So Tillman wisely will send that brigade under Adolphus Hyman on a 20-mile long road march to Fort Donelson. And they can't take the straight route because McClernand is closer to the straight route than the Confederates are, the Telegraph Road. So he will cross Standing Rock Creek 5 times to get to Fort Donelson. And then the gunboats will open fire and start to reduce the batteries here. Tillman stays behind with a little over 100 gunners to buy them a couple hours of time so Adolphus Hyman's brigade can safely get away. One by one, the ironclads are damaged badly. The Essex is penetrated. The shot hits next to one of the boilers, which explodes and scalds a number of the crewmen who dive into the cold water to succor their pain that they're in. So that ship is knocked out. Foote lets his boats get in a lot closer, and the 20-foot thick walls are not enough to stop 8 and 9-inch Dahlgren rounds, which are penetrating right through. The Confederate 2 main guns of the 17, their 24-pound rifle blows up. And then their 10-pound Columbiad smoothbore, they're jamming the vent prick in the vent at the top, and it snaps off. So they've now spiked their own gun by accident. Tillman looks at his watch and sees, I've done all I can do to help Hyman get away, and he will strike his colors. Due to the flooding here at Fort Henry because of the river rising. The Union Navy puts an officer in a longboat and sails through the Sally Port to take surrender of the fort. You're not supposed to sail boats through Sally Port. You're supposed to ride your horse, walk through them, whatever. So that shows you the problem that even the Confederate defenders were having. The water was waist deep by the time Fort Henry struck its colors late in the afternoon of February 6, 1862.
That's great. Stay up here for a sec, Greg, because this is really cool. We get these moments on these videos, and this is the first one of this trip already. I'd already read that a lot of the Confederates are in knee-high water at the parade ground and whatnot, but I never really thought about that. I mean, so Tillman knows he's not going to win. He's just trying to buy some time here. The gunners probably know it too. They're doing some good execution. If battles were about math, about casualties, the Confederates win, but they know they're going to lose. Do we have any accounts from the gunners who are in this hopeless situation?
Henry Walk, who wrote an account in this, both post-war. It's in the Battles and Leaders series as well. There are other gunboat accounts of Foote wrote about it in his official report, talking about the damage that was done to these gunboats. You get more gunners accounts from over at Fort Donelson, where a Medal of Honor will be awarded to a gunner on the Carondelet. So it's bad. The Essex is really shot up. It was not designed as a city-class gunboat, and the boiler was on the gun deck. So if you penetrate that casemate, that puts the boiler at risk. There are pictures you can find from the U.S. Naval Historical Institute online of 3 of the city-class gunboats built at Carondelet, Missouri, which is St. Louis. And you'll see the boilers are horizontal below the gun deck. Or if you've been to Vicksburg and seen the USS Cairo, that's one of the city-class boats. It was built at Mound City, along with the Louisville and the Cincinnati, downstream from St. Louis. And you'll see how they planned that. When Pook designed them, Samuel Pook, and when James Eads built them, he's thinking ahead. Like, if I put the boiler below the gun deck and the gun deck is penetrated, the boiler will be fine. That was not the case on the USS Essex. So there's some great accounts of that you can find in the official records and in the Battles and Leaders series.
Good, that's great, Greg. Thank you so much. And that's Chris White behind the camera. I wish somebody could experience one time us behind the camera, namely Chris, by the way, with a windscreen. It's not windy out now, but someone will say, hey, maybe you should use a windscreen. We always have a windscreen on. And he's got about 60 photos in there. And while he's shooting this, he's scrolling around and putting up the right photo and map at the same time. So it's not that easy. And one of the maps he's already put up, actually, I'm not sure if he's showing anything now, is this one. And I just want to say a thing and then turn it over to Chris Mackowski here. So we're standing somewhere right around here. Okay, we're on the new bank. Again, this is all modern Tennessee River. That wasn't there at the time. You can see the historic river that way. And Henry sat right at the edge of it. So in other words, we're looking out toward where Henry would have been right out there and toward a much smaller historic river. As you go downstream, if I have this right, that's where Fort Hyman is, and Chris has already shown you that along the way. So I guess I just wanted to give you a little bit of orientation before Chris came on.
Yeah, and I just kind of wanted to just use my little hydrology here for you a little bit. The river flows from this direction in the south northward in that direction toward Kentucky. And the reason it's so wide today is because of Kentucky Dam, which is up near Lake City, and it has created this fantastic lake behind us, which has given you the historically flooded Fort Henry behind us here. But the other thing that's also important to keep in mind, aside from the width of the lake that was created by the dam, is that the river itself changes course over time. Army Corps of Engineers in the time since has tried to stabilize the flow of the river a little bit, but if you look at the historical trace of the river versus the way these rivers flow today, you'll see they creep over time. That's, for instance, why Vicksburg is landlocked and not right up against the Mississippi today like it had been once upon a time. So the topography changes, and that's why it's important to come out here with some folks who know what's going on, who can point you to those maps that Garry has talked about to help situate what's going on here so you can understand what's going on. Now, the last thing I want to mention is here, as Greg pointed out, Ulysses S. Grant is thinking ahead. He wants to get here and capture the garrison. He is looking for essentially a knockout blow. And so he shows up here, and I have in my mind this image of taking him and dunking him in the water and setting him here dripping wet and disappointed because he can't get in that knockout blow because the garrison has pulled out. So what's he going to do? He's not going to start looking down the river and seeing what's next. He still wants that knockout blow. And so he's going to set his sights to a fort just a little bit to the east of here on a parallel river, the Cumberland River, let me get that out of my mouth, as it heads down toward Nashville. And Grant's going to take the swing that he missed here and get ready to swing to the east. Grant?
One missed opportunity, if you can focus in on that map there. This is from Kendall Gott's book on Fort Donelson. This is the Ledyard Phelps gunboat raid that goes all the way to Florence, Alabama. There's a couple reasons why he does this. And one of the reasons why Fort Henry was built where it was is A, it's below the Kentucky-Tennessee border, so as not to violate the Kentucky neutrality. B, it's above the railroad bridge at Danville, which is several miles to the south of us upstream. So they wanted to have the protection for the railroad. That bridge had just opened, by the way, in November of 1861. So Phelps takes the 3 timber-clad gunboats, the Lexington, the Tyler, and the Conestoga, and sails upstream. There's a couple reasons why he wants to do this. One, damage that railroad bridge, which is one of only 2 nominally east-west railroads in the entire Confederacy. That was the Memphis, Clarksville, and Louisville Railroad, a spur of the Louisville and Nashville. The other one's down in northern Mississippi and Alabama, the Memphis and Charleston. So once they damage that bridge, that means the Confederates can't use it. But they also had actionable intelligence that near the battlefield of Shiloh at Cerro Gordo, the Confederates were building a massive ironclad called the CSS Eastport. In fact, if the Confederates had finished it, it would have been the most powerful ironclad on the western rivers, even more powerful than the Union USS Benton. So they pull up at Cerro Gordo, they see the hull, the casemate, there's iron on the banks, there's wood on the banks, and they leave one of the gunboats there to secure the Eastport, put up all the construction materials onto the hull, and then the other 2 gunboats will sail all the way to Florence, Alabama. They will capture some more supplies that are designated for the Eastport, and they will have a little gun battle down there with some Confederate troop ships and transports, and they will not see an entire Confederate soldier the entire way. The Confederate Defensive Department number 2 is a crust defense with no reserves behind it whatsoever. So here's your great what if for February 1862. Rather than going after Fort Donelson, what if Grant convinces Henry Halleck to load up the transports with thousands of troops and then sail all the way upstream to Florence, Alabama? Drop 30,000 troops there, cut the Memphis and Charleston Railroad, and there's not a Confederate soldier within hundreds of miles of there, and it would have scared the bejesus out of the Confederacy at that time of the year. But his boss was Halleck. Halleck was a conservative Jominian-type officer. He looks at Fort Henry as a base on a line of operations, as Jomini would call it, and then he looks at his map and he wants to go to Fort Henry.
Good.
Excuse me, Fort Donelson.
Yeah. And mark that as the first military theorist mentioned on the trip so far. I'm sure there's more to come as we go. You know, we're going to wrap this up with a little bit of preservation and visitation stuff. But before we do, something he said is just perfect. This idea that one fort falls, the thin crust of the Confederacy, and that Union gunboats can go all the way to Alabama. I mean, we're in northwest Tennessee practically at this point, if that's how it's termed properly. So really interesting. And this is how the Union is able to capture 100,000 square miles of territory in Arkansas and Missouri and Tennessee and otherwise. This is why the Confederate capital at Nashville of Tennessee is going to fall after Fort Donelson. Sorry to spoil the end there. I think you know what's going to happen here. So let me bring Greg back in for just a brief look at, most people think Fort Henry is gone. It's out there somewhere.
It's out there.
And the idea that we passed Confederate works on the way here that figured in the battle, that Fort Hyman is still there. What's left, and is there any way for people to see it, Greg?
Well, if you want to go to Fort Henry, as I said earlier, put a mask on and some flippers and then just go paddle around down there. There are pictures of Fort Henry taken in the 1920s and an aerial shot in the 1930s. You can see the clear outline of Fort Henry literally right on the riverbank of the Tennessee River. And then in the late 1930s, the Tennessee Valley Authority flooded the whole area to bring development into the upper South at the time. So the outer works are still here. When I do tours over here for both the Army and the civilian groups, I always get asked, what is there to see at Fort Henry? And thankfully, we are in an area called Land Between the Lakes, between the Tennessee and the Cumberland River, and it's owned by or managed, I should say, by the Forestry Service, which is Department of Agriculture, a federal agency. So all this land here is protected, and they have put up markers in conjunction with the National Park Service that you can find and come out here and see what there is to see, and then hike down here and get the beautiful view behind me that you see of the Tennessee River, and then look at the marker buoy out there in the channel about where Fort Henry was and still is, what's left of it down there.
Cool. Thanks so much, Greg Biggs. And by the way, who off camera corrected me, the river does in fact flow that way, so I mixed up and downstream. I'm great at mixing those things up. So You all, thank you so much for supporting this effort. Those of you who specifically supported it, you're going to get one or two or more videos from us to specifically for those who donated. So next time we do one of these swings, maybe you'll get involved if you haven't yet. And even if you haven't, we hope you've enjoyed these videos. We hope that you share them with your friends. Go to battlefields.org to get inspired. And thank you so much for your support of this effort, but mainly for battlefield preservation and education.